All right, so today, guys, I'm going to be doing the beginning of some just fun, simple projects that you can do if you're just getting started into blacksmithing. So what we're going to be making today is just a hairpin. I've got a very small piece of, I think it's 3/16 by 3/16 inch square-ish bar. It's not very square, so I'm going to have to square it up. But yeah, these are a really, really easy thing to make. And they're a really fun thing to make especially if you're starting out and you don't really have a lot of skill, essentially. This is a very good way to teach yourself hammer control and how hard you need to actually hit something to make it move versus just lightly shaping something, if that makes sense. So we're going to throw this in the fire, we're going to heat it up, and I'll show you guys how to do it, essentially. It's a really, really easy thing to do. You could start with a larger piece and break it down into a thinner bar, for sure. I just happen to have a whole bunch of these lying around as blanks for making hairpins, so I'm going to use this. But yeah, you could start with anything. Like, you could start with, something this size and just break it down to that size very, very easily. And this is all going to be done with a hand hammer. I'm not going to use the power hammer at all. The idea behind this series is to just, with minimal tools, show you what you can make. So I'm just going to be using hammer, anvil, forge. And in theory, you could even do this without a forge. You could do this with an oxyacetylene torch if you really wanted to. It wouldn't be as easy or as quick, but you could do it. But yeah, we'll throw it in the fire and get to work. Alright, so first things first, you can do this with a pair of flat jaw tongs as well, which are something really easy to make. But right now, all we're going to be doing is working on getting this squared. So I'm just going to be squaring it up. It kind of is oblong on one side, so I'm going to have to work that side a little bit more. But all we're doing is we're just squaring everything up and trying to make it, relatively easy to work with. And I'm hammering this relatively cold so that I don't move too much material. It's better to move material slowly if you're unsure, but at the same time, you do need to learn what the temperatures are. So for moving this material, because it's so thin and so malleable, even at really cold temperatures, I can hit it with the hammer. But if you're working with heavier material or harder material, like really high carbon steels, you can actually damage the face of your hammer and put a bunch of nicks and dings in it, which is not a fun time, especially when you have to get them out at some point in time, sitting there with a file or a sander or something. So yeah, I recommend trying to make sure that your piece is always glowing in some way, shape, or form. So even if it's just very, very lightly red, you can move it pretty easily without wrecking your hammer face. Beyond that, if it's colder than glowing, it just won't move properly. The other thing with this video is it's probably going to be continuous because it really does not take a lot of time for this material to heat up in the forge. So I'm just going to continue going and talking. So we're going to continue squaring this up. I'm just gently tapping. I'm not putting a lot of power behind my hammer because we don't want to stretch this out a whole bunch. We just want to make sure it's square right now and relatively even. So all you see me doing is I'm turning it 90 degrees every time and just kind of letting my hammer fall. I'm not swinging it hard or anything like that. I'm just letting it fall. And it looks pretty square down that cross section, so I'm going to flip it over, or flip it around, and throw it back in the fire. And it should warm up pretty quickly. So the idea here is we're going to be making one of the hairpins that I kind of traditionally make for craft shows and other things like that. Festivals, anything, really. But they also make really, really good gifts for anyone who has long hair. And if you know how to use them, if you know how to use a hairpin, They are honestly amazing. They replace so many like hair ties and like little elastics that people use. I don't know, I really like them over needing to wear a hair tie. The only time I ever really wear a hair tie is when I'm out here working or out in the grinding room, because I can't wear a hairpin with all of my PPE. But they are a very, very nice and kind of pretty accessory that you can have. I don't know, I'm a big fan of them. So now that we've got this mostly square, just gonna make sure that we're pretty square here. I like to try and make sure it's a little bit flat on every side. Make sure we don't have too many like big lumps in it or anything. We're gonna flip it around and make sure this side looks good. All right, there we go. So we're pretty square all around, and we're pretty flat everywhere around. So now I need to taper out a point on each side of this, so it's pointed on each side. So that's what we're gonna do next. Throw it back in the fire, let it heat up. But yeah, I've been doing most of these kind of production style. So when I make them, I usually have 10 pieces of square stock in the forge, and I'm just pulling one out, going through it, and then setting it down somewhere where it's not going to burn anything, and then you just kind of repeat. You do the same action over and over and over again. It gets really repetitive, but the muscle memory is there, and it keeps you in tune with what you're doing, for me at least. So we're just going to draw out a point on this side. I try and make them even, so it doesn't really matter which side I grab it on. I can make one the point of the hairpin and one the curl of the hairpin. Alright, so we've got a point there now. Now we need to round that end. So as it heats up, all I'm going to be doing is turning it onto the diagonal and smushing the corners down. And then as you smush the corners down, you're creating an octagon. And then from the octagon, you kind of just like, if you're on a larger piece of material, you then squish all the corners again, but on a smaller piece of material like this, I just kind of sit there and do this and very slowly roll the material, like roll the tongs through my hand to create that nice cylinder. So right here, we're up on the diagonal, and I'm just gonna work my way along, flattening it out, making those diagonals kind of flat. And even right now, I could probably start rolling it. So I just start doing this, and I'm just very lightly, again, I'm very lightly tapping, working my way around the entire thing, and then I'll move half of a hammer face over and just keep doing this. It gives it a really nice texture too. And we just keep moving that half hammer over, that half hammer face over every time we've gone around one time, and then just keep slowly, and you want to just hit very, very lightly. You don't want to be hitting hard, because if you start hitting hard, you'll deform everything. And then I just work my way back up, just slowly working my way through, making it nice and cylindrical. It gives it a really, really nice finish. And there we go. So that's one point of the hairpin. Now we work on the other side. Same thing, we're going to taper it out to a point. So some of the tools that you'll need for doing this is, I have a pair of twisting pliers, That's these guys right here. You can, however, use a pair of like needle nose pliers if, again, you're just getting started. You're not going to have all the crazy tools. I'd recommend if you are getting started, a good hammer, not necessarily one like this. You can get blacksmith's hammers, technically, I think they're called engineer's hammers. From most hardware stores, all you do is you round the face out so you don't have any sharp edges on either side of an engineer's hammer, and there you go, you've got a blacksmith's hammer. What is typically called a cross-peen hammer. These pair of tongs can be substituted with a pair of vice grips that you've taken the teeth off of, or even a pair of duckbill pliers, maybe. I would recommend, as soon as you can, trying to make your own set of tongs, or even buying a nice set of tongs, flat jaw tongs. Don't buy wolf jaw tongs. Buy a nice set of closed flat bit tongs, and those will hold 90% of everything that you originally want to start with as like a beginner blacksmith. Flat jaws, and maybe, I guess, a set of bolt jaw tongs. So these guys that close, they've got, so you want one that closes completely, but it's got a nice little square in here. That'll let you hold round stock and square stock as well. So those are really nice. But other than that, that's what I would call like good for a beginner blacksmith. An anvil, obviously, but you don't need an anvil. You can use a piece of railway as your anvil, which again, that might be difficult for some people to get a hold of. But any heavy piece of metal, essentially, even a sledgehammer head. I've seen guys start out and their anvil's literally a sledgehammer head, like a 10, 15 pound sledgehammer head. So all we're doing here is we're just going to continue tapering down this other side into a point. Again, we want it to be a nice clean point. I'm not a huge fan of, some people like a more rustic, rough finish. And you can do that for sure. You could leave this completely square and not take the edges off and have it look a lot more rustic and less refined, which is totally fine. That's a stylistic choice more than anything else. At least in my mind it is. All right, but we've got that point on there, so we're going to heat it back up. We're going to do the same thing that we did on the other side. We're just going to take those corners down and then roll it through to make it nice and clean. I sadly don't have a finished one here, otherwise I'd show you guys the finished product. But we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. That should be hot enough. We're going to take those corners down, get a nice good grip on this, and just gently tap the corners down in on themselves. Very nice, very simple forging technique, but it's a lot of good practice. So now that we've got those corners down, I'm going to just start working through rounding everything out again. This just makes it a really nice, clean finish. And then after this, we'll be making what I like to call it the swirl on the top, or like the hand piece. So the thing that you actually hold on to when you're putting your hair in a hairpin. But we're just going to keep rolling it through here. And you'll notice that I'm doing this very cold. There's no heat left in this thing. And I'm doing that because we're not so much, like, we are deforming the material, but we're not trying to like change the shape of it as much as we are just trying to refine the shape that's already there. There we go. So now we're going to work on the swirl or the handle. So heat it back up. For this, I don't need a hammer anymore. The hammer can just sit away. These are the only two things that we need. Actually, no, that's a lie. I'm a liar. We need the hammer for one more process. I am a liar. Forgive me for that. But once it's hot, all we're going to do is at the end of where the roll is, where it looks nice and clean, you're going to take that to the end of the anvil and you're going to bend it over the corner of the anvil. Hit down, and just make sure you end up with a nice 90-degree angle like that. We can heat it back up. You want the tip of this, when you do this, you want the tip to be very warm because it makes it a lot easier. We don't need the hammer anymore except for like maybe a little bit of tweaking at one point in time. So now that the tip's relatively warm, all I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take my pliers and I'm gonna curl this end around like that. And you can just squish it, and there you go. You've got a nice little curl on one side. Heat it up again. And there's a couple ways that you could do this too. So you could not have it be square. You could round the whole thing out so it's nice and round and just forge finish almost. And then just leave it like that. What I'm planning on doing is putting back and forth twists in it, and then I sand off the edges of the twists to give it this kind of weird candy cane pattern. You guys will see what I mean once I get there. But now, once we're here, all we're gonna do is we're gonna grab about halfway down, or 2/3 of the way down, and you're just gonna bend it over, and then squeeze it. Back into itself, so like that. And now that it's there, it's kind of warped a little bit, so all we gotta do is we gotta grab our hammer again and just kind of tap everything flat. I like to set it over the face of my anvil, and you can just see where all of the high spots are. And just try and get rid of some of those high spots. But yeah, you've got your little curl here. I might even just make the curl a little bit more expressive, but that's just me. You don't need to do that at all. There we go. So now that it's all heated up, all we need to do is I've got a bucket of water here. You can use snow, you can use a small bit of water. I might actually do that. I might just go grab a glass of water so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. But I'm gonna throw that back in the fire, and I'm gonna change where the camera's angled, because we do need to use a vise. That is the other tool that you need, is a vise of some description. So give me 2 seconds. I'm gonna change how the camera's facing, and you guys will see. All right, so this is the new angle. What you guys are gonna be seeing is, here's my little cup of water, and all I'm gonna be doing is just dipping the hairpin in there after I've twisted a certain section. It'll make more sense once I just show you. So this is gonna come out completely hot. We wanna put it into the vise where it is stopped being square, clamp it in the vise, and just give it a twist. I usually grab it where I want the twist to terminate, and I'll go 1, 2.5, 3. Sorry, no, that'll be 2. That'll be 2 full twists. So now we've got that twist in there. We undo it, we put it back in the fire, it'll heat up really quickly. And then after we've done that twist, we just go back the other way. That's what the water's for, so I don't undo the previous twist. I cool it down up to where that twist is, and then I can go backwards without undoing the first twist I did, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So I'm just waiting for it to heat up here. It should be good. We're gonna bring it out. We're gonna dip it in here to about there. Pull it out, put it back in here, clamp it in, grab it where I want the twist to terminate, and go back against it. What? Oh, we're sliding in the vise. I gotta heat this back up. Sorry, guys. But yeah, so that's the general idea, is you're just heating it up, cooling it down to where the twist terminates, and then retwisting the other way. And you get this really cool kind of like candy cane-ish pattern. You could also do this with just a single twist, going one way, and sanding it off to give you like a real candy cane pattern. All right, so we're nice and warm again. We're gonna cool it down to where I think it needs to be cooled down, which is about there. Grab it, put it in the vise, squeeze it tight, and then go and, this thing does not want to grip. There we go. So you'll notice that this is getting all sorts of like, not straight anymore. But that's okay. We're gonna work that out. I promise. So the other thing that you need is a piece of wood. Literally like an old hammer handle, like this, will work for what I'm gonna do. And I actually have one in here somewhere. Somewhere in here I have a chunk of wood that I use for this. Maybe I don't. Maybe it got burned. That is a very distinct possibility. Well, I guess I'm using a newish hammer handle then. So that should be warm enough. We're gonna pull it out. Same idea, cool it off. Put it back in the vise. Get it to hold tight. Grab where I want it to terminate and twist the other way. I like to make my twists relatively tight, but that's just me. You are more than welcome to make them as tight or loose as you want. I think I can manage to do one more nice good twist in there. It might be a little short though. We'll see. We'll see how it looks. All right. Yeah, this is generally what I do for getting ready for craft shows and fairs, is I make a lot of small trinkets. Leaves, hairpins, stake turners. Stake turners are another really fun project, actually. If you guys want another really fun beginner project, stake turners and leaves are great things to start with. They teach you a lot about hammer control and what you're doing. So we're gonna cool this guy back off again, right down to where I want it to be. Nice and cool. Put it back in the vise. I'm gonna hold it right here and we're gonna twist, or maybe not gonna twist. We're gonna twist right back the opposite way and we're only gonna get maybe a twist and a half in. There we go. All right, so now that that's done, you can see it's all kinds of warped and gross looking. So I'm gonna heat it back up and then we're gonna grab the hammer handle and I'll put you guys back to where you were before so you can see properly what I'm doing. All right, so now that you guys are back to where you're supposed to be, pull the hairpin out. I've got a hammer handle here, which is perfect for what I need to do. So you need a piece of relatively hard wood, and this is not going to affect the twist, which is what you don't want to do. You don't want to wreck the twist part. But now, all I'm doing is I'm just making sure that this thing is straight. I'm just finding the high points, I'm looking down the edges, because the fun part about these is they can kind of screw with your eye. They can make it look like, well, it's not straight when it actually is. So one of the best things that I do is I use the surface of my anvil, because I know that my anvil is true, or relatively true at least. For the amount that I'm doing, it's true enough. But now, we've got it all nice and finished up. So I'm gonna go cool it off real quick. And you can use a belt sander, you could use sandpaper for any of this. I have a belt grinder and that's usually what I use, but I'm going to show you guys not an easier way to do it, but another way that you can do it, which is just using files. Just using a bastard cut file or a fine rasp. You can finish these completely. So you don't need any sort of power tools to do this. All right, so we're back like this, and all I'm gonna be doing, I've still got the forge going, which I should probably turn down. Actually, we're gonna just going to turn it off. And this will probably be the only part of this sequence that's sped up. But all I'm going to be doing is I've got a bastard cut file here, which is a really rough file. And all I do is I just go back and forth along here to just take off the corners of that square bar. That's all I'm doing, is I'm just taking corners off of the square bar. And I just move my way back and forth, draw filing. And if you get to a spot that you can't reach, like going over it like I am, then all you do is you just turn it in your vise. You could, in theory, do this with like an angle grinder if you were brave enough, or a belt sander, or even some sandpaper. You could do this with just plain old 60 grit sandpaper and finish it up pretty nicely. But I'm just going to give it a turn. There we go. Make sure she's locked in tight there. And just keep going. And all I'm doing is I'm just taking corners off. That's all that's happening here. There's no crazy techniques. We're just doing something called draw filing. And I try and make these as cylindrical as possible. It doesn't always happen that way, but I try and make them as cylindrical as possible so that it gives a nice hand feel as well when you pick them up, or they're going in your hair and they're not getting caught on anything. So I just kind of slowly work my way back and forth, making it look real nice and pretty if I can. Rotating it. And back to this. And the first couple corners are really hard to get off. Breaking those corners initially kind of sucks. It's kind of difficult. You can get the file caught pretty easily, and that's not very fun, admittedly. But if you just keep kind of going back and forth gently, I'm not putting any pressure, by the way. Like, I'm barely putting any pressure on this piece. And we're just slowly working our way down the whole piece. And here we are. We're at the last kind of corner. I'm going to bring this out just a little bit more. There we go. And we'll get those corners off, and we'll be done. That's going to be the full... Oop, I put a little pressure there, and you saw it move. Yeah, there we go. Come on, you. Hold on there. It's not liking to hold on that spot, so I guess I got to move it back to where it was. Yeah, all I'm doing is just knocking down corners. And that was with very minimal tools. Again, you could industrialize this process and make it a lot faster. But where's the point in that? You're making something small and easy. So I'm going to go clean this off now. Get rid of all the file shavings, and you guys will see the finished product. All right, so there we go. That's the full finished product. That's just one of the little hairpins. And they're really fun to make. They're really easy to make. You could do just a continuous twist, like I said, the one way. Get a nice candy cane pattern in there. But I'm a huge fan of this like offset twist. I think it looks really nice. But yeah, if you guys want to see more videos like this, of like simple projects that you can start out on, I'm planning on making a couple more about leaves and stake turners, as well as starting some stuff on making your own tools, which is something that I really, really enjoy doing. But yeah, if you guys like how that turned out, let me know in the comments. Give the video a like, and if you can, subscribe. Thanks so much, guys, and feel free to come back to the workshop anytime.